This is the Team Objection podcast for January 14th, 2021, episode 467. Got the 2021 right. This episode's already going better, other than Dave clearing his throat right as the show was about to start. But look, you can't help it. It's kind of involuntary. I get it. It's fine. We're here to talk some basketball, and we're going to merge that with another segment. Shaun will take the wheels here in a minute. But I just wanted to say, we often talk about lighthearted pop culture or sports topics on this show. There is certainly a hour and a half to 4 hour long episode we could do about the current state of affairs. So just know that we're not unaware of what's happening out there right now, and the political climate, and the fact that my phone's flashlight just is on and just fell out of my pocket. It's all it's all falling apart. But I'm going to keep soldiering through.
Flashlight on.
It did, yeah. It's pretty impressive.
I am getting tired of you making this announcement about every 6 months, because we had to do that approximately 6 months ago for the same type of thing.
It'd be nice if the world didn't necessitate it.
I know. Between COVID and then everything else, I was telling somebody, again, we're not going to go too far into this, but like just surface level stuff. Let's pull back the curtain behind my job a little bit. We get 2 suggested stories for our front page from the people that curate all the wire services for us, national, world news. So there's 2 suggestions they give. We can take one, we can take both, we can take neither, depending on what we have, whatever. In February of last year, there were frequently, almost as often as not, days where I would look at both those options and I would go, not really that appropriate for Flagstaff, like not stuff our readers are going to be interested in. There's nothing that was that big a deal that we needed to get outside on the front page. Since the pandemic hit, there have been more times where it's been both stories and then some compared to this, because these things happen not just outside of our area and still have an impact, but like some of them have a direct impact here, like some of the pandemic stuff. So like even these huge national stories, as my computer makes noises, the whole thing's falling apart. It's fine. Even national stories are making everything just kind of like change drastically. It's just uncanny. I know I've only been doing this for 16 years, which sounds like a weird only, but like it's unprecedented. It's a word that's been used too often, but it still is true. It's just amazing to me, the amount of news and the amount of things that have changed in the last 9-10 months.
How do you feel about being part of the lamestream media that's all fake anyway? So,
that bothered me more before, and now it's like, yeah, that's just a rallying cry for the stupid. So
I know.
It's so fascinating to me because I listen to Republican radio, even more than Dave probably at this point, and
completely more because I never do.
We'll see.
And what's fascinating is 2 things. I can understand if your only exposure to news is Republican radio. I can understand a lot of why you think the way you do and why you have the perception you do of the world. I get it. Because if you listen to it, you almost start to be like, oh, wow, yeah, why aren't they challenging it? And you're like, oh, wait, just for example, there's no evidence at all, just for starters. So that's interesting to me. And then it's like the rallying cry of all radio, Rush and everyone else, everyone that's like subbing in for him because he's like in and out because he has cancer, I guess, where it's like fake news. And it's like truly the only when I think of a news source that is just propagating a bunch of stuff that's fake and not based in reality and delusional, it is just this news source. It's insane. It's wild, and it's endlessly fascinating. I really do. It's like watching like a car crash. Like, you don't enjoy it, but it's like you can't look away. It's fascinating.
I was wondering why you like to subject yourself to torture.
Oh, and I hate it. And every time I get out of the car, I'm like, well, enough of that. Like, fuck this. Every time.
This is exactly why I quit Facebook, like, completely, and just be like, I can't, like, this is basically just torture for me. I don't know why I'm subjecting myself to this, so I'm going to remove this from my life. And it's been much better ever since.
Well, and then you listen to the advertisements, and like, are you 90 years old and looking for retirement? Like, yeah, exactly.
No, I'm not actually. Weird. People are surprised when I tell them I visit Fox News once a week. But I'm doing it just to see what they're covering, what their approach is. Because I think if you ever shut out any other source of information, then you become too tunnel visioned. It's too myopic just to be like, I don't care at all what they're doing. It's like, you probably should care at least a little bit.
Well, you're exactly right in most times. But now it's even interesting because the EIB network is like far right. Even Fox News now is like sort of moderate in
Not far
comparison
enough right.
now. Yeah,
Yeah.
not far enough right for Trump. And it's crazy how things are changing. I had a coworker who was like, "I think the Republican Party is done." I don't know about that.
No.
But there is a bit of splintering, and it's really interesting. And it's interesting how evil they can paint the Democratic Party to. This is fascism, what Twitter's doing, don't you know?
Mm-hmm.
And Facebook.
Isn't it funny how that word gets thrown around so frequently on both sides of this is, fascist, that's what Trump is. Oh, this is fascism, shutting down Twitter.
See,
Yeah, it's an awful lot of fascism and socialism and communism all within a democratic republic.
Communism, yeah, and that's exactly. CEOs, I guess, are now distancing themselves from Trump, and they're like, "This is what communist countries do. This is where we're headed, America." And then they talk about the Democratic Party fear-mongering, and you're like, "Look what you just did."
Mhm.
Anyways, they did exactly what we said we weren't going to do.
It's fine.
I had to share this brave new world I'm embarking in Republican radio.
Last thought I have real quick is I just love how they just ask random questions that don't really have an answer to be like, yeah, you're right. Why is that?
What's
and then it gets
stokes this
questioned every-
conspiracy theory notion to begin with? Because if you can start a question that has no answer, or at least one that's not readily available, then you get the wheels turning there.
Why don't they let us look? Why don't they let us see the ballots? Why? Why can't we do? What are they afraid of? Like that is not how that works, ma'ams and sirs.
All of this was to say that last week we considered briefly talking about some of the stuff that was happening prior to the incident at the Capitol, just talking about the election and the transfer and all that jazz. It's a good thing we didn't, because we recorded that on a Tuesday night. It would have been utterly useless by the time it aired on Thursday, given what happened last Wednesday. But anyways, it's top of mind. We could talk about it forever, but we choose not to on this show because it's meant to be more of an escape most of the time, and that's
it's a good thing we weren't like, you guys have a really great feeling about the direction America's headed. Last
Finally,
week.
we're moving on, guys.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any more bumps in the road?
Clean slate.
So I am a man who has
Nope. End that sentence.
a lot of takes, most of which are hot.
This is not your best segue.
And I have a hot take. No, I mean, I'm getting back to the. I'm just getting away.
That's
Be glad
fine.
I
Yeah,
am.
yeah,
I
that's
would stay
fine.
on the stage
Eject
for-
button.
It was a little stilted, I think.
No, this is how you introduce. What? I have a hot take. Is
I
that
am
what you want, Dave?
who
The rules
has-
of my own segment? Is that what you want?
Hot take. You're
It's
like
better than
Shaq.
him being like, what we saw at the Capitol last week was a lot of especially hot takes, but I have some of my own. And a segment I like to call.
Yeah. No. So I'm transitioning to the NBA now. To the Suns specifically. My hot take is this. I'm about a quarter of a season away from being completely off the DeAndre Ayton train. Just done. Giving up. I don't know if we need to bench. I don't know if we need to trade. I don't know what we need to do. But my patience is gone.
So is this coming from lack of offensive side? Because the defensive side has been pretty dang good overall.
Yeah, it's lack of offensive side to the point where he's regressed past rookie season. Past college, maybe. I didn't watch him in college, but it's terrible.
There comes a certain point where it was one thing his rookie season when he played with the laughable array of point guards that we had that we've talked about multiple times on this show. But it's Ricky Rubio and it's Chris Paul. Two of the best passing point guards of our generation. And yes, he's flashed some chemistry with both of them, but not nearly enough. And it gets to the point where it's like, how long can the excuse be that nobody can get him the ball? How long can it be until this turns into he can't make himself available for the ball and his teammates don't trust that he can catch it and or do something with it when he does?
He doesn't even look at the rim when he catches the ball. And half the time he doesn't even look for the ball. I mean, passes are going by him because he doesn't even have his head on a swivel.
It's so weird because the guy's got such fantastic touch when he does shoot. Like you see that little turnaround he gets where he does that quick post up turn. Like it looks
once every 3 games, it's really good. And I don't know what the issue is, and it almost makes me double down more. Either he just has no instinct for it. Well, I mean, that must be the case. the thing that I don't understand is, are the coaches trying to instill this in him? You gotta get to the rim, like you have to. And if they're not, that's a big deal. And if they are, that's a big deal in a different way.
I'm wondering.
And honestly, the defense, great. I'm so glad we're still letting some teams on some nights absolutely obliterate us, and you're absent. So when your defense is good, it's really quite good. When it's there, it's like you're sleepwalking.
It's funny. I wonder if the coaches are hitting a point where we're understanding his foils and understanding his shortcomings and working to the strengths only. And that is concerning if that is the case.
I don't even have these sky-high expectations for him. Like we've talked about on the show before with some folks, they're like, well, if he doesn't average 30 and 20, then he's a failure. And it's like, no one's averaged 30 and 20. Wilt didn't average 30 and 20. Like, I don't know what you're expecting, but you better start being prepared to be disappointed. However, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect him to be like a 16 and 10 guy who could also be an all NBA level defensive anchor.
Mm-hmm.
And then have that still not be quite as good as Luka, but you could be like, all right, like they didn't screw up. Maybe they made the wrong pick, but they didn't make a bad pick.
And this whole time, that's been my slogan is like, you can't compare him to Luka. Yes, we probably lost on that, but he's still like a very good player. Like he's not a bust. Well, he's starting to resemble a bust now. If you compare him to other people of that draft, which is pretty loaded, it's not good. And I mean, it's a 1-game sample in this case. He got outplayed by Robin Lopez. He got manhandled. And you're like, yeah, well, Robin Lopez is big and physical, and so is Rudy Gobert, and so is Sabonis. And it's like most teams have someone that you can make an excuse for Ayton for. And at some point, he just has to man up.
But then, again, you have the nights like he plays against Jokic and goes for 22 and 11. It's like, oh, there it is. Oh, okay,
Sure.
Figure it out. And that's actually probably what's more frustrating than anything is when you see him play against Jokic and have a great game, go against the Clippers and have a fantastic game, and you're like, good, the guy's figuring it out, and he goes out and scores 4 points the next game. It's just like, ugh.
4 points on he only shoots it like 3 times, and one of them's a fadeaway for no reason.
He had against Gobert, he was 2 of 8 shooting for 4 points, which is just awful.
That's the defensive player of the year. But
yeah, of course.
Still, if that was the one game that was bad, or even like one of a couple this season, you'd be like, all right, like, everybody has off days. Booker, as good as he is, has at least some nights where he's not doing the best. He has a single-point scoring game this season. So nobody's immune to doing it every single night. That's why LeBron's consistency and a handful of other players is so shocking. I mean, Steph Curry went 2 for 16 the other night. It happens. But the problem is this season in particular, it's been happening more often than not that he doesn't show up. And that's different than the last 2 seasons. The rookie season, he was inconsistent, but he was growing over the course of the season. You can see the build happening. Last season, he got so much better defensively. His offense took a slight step back, and he had up and down performances, but you're like, okay. Now, I mean, how many of his games would you say were good this year? 3 of 11? 4?
And
for a player that's expected to be as good as he is, that's not good enough.
It's almost like happenstance sometimes, too, I'm afraid to say. Like, even when it's good, it's like he got hit on a wide open cut to the basket. It's not like, oh, he caught it at the top of the key and drove in, which is something he's capable of. I mean, he's not going to burn a bunch of defenders, but you guys read Brightside. There's a screenshot, or maybe it was Arizona. Anyways, there's a defender that's like under the basket. Ayton gets it at the top. That should be, I'm attacking. There's no one in the paint at all. And he immediately kicks it for a 3. That was like semi-contested. And the thing is, we need that from him because when our 3s are falling, we can beat anybody, as we've shown. When they're not, we can lose to the 2 worst teams in the East on the same road trip. We need someone to take it inside.
I didn't get to watch a ton of that Wizards game, and by the looks of things, I didn't miss much. We had other stuff going on, people in town. But the part I did watch, there was a point where he was being guarded by Lopez, and Lopez was playing off of him to the point where he was basically under the basket. And he caught the ball at the free throw line, a jumper he took almost too often last season, and he stood there and he looked around. Now, I could understand a brief moment of hesitation from you're not expecting to be that open in that spot. Like, that's a little weird, so it throws you off. It was like 3 seconds of looking around, like, is there a player I can hit? And he's a good passer, and at times he's actually making the right play by doing this. But when he catches the ball with a foot in the paint, as Eddie Johnson likes to say, there's got to be turn and hook shot, turn and fade away, go to work, get a foul or two occasionally, maybe once or twice a season. It's not there, and I can understand why people are getting frustrated because now the longer the sample size gets, the more frustrating it becomes.
And yeah, and I'm with you, Chris, on the like we mock like, oh, but you didn't dunk it. Now I'm getting to a point where I'm like, okay, motherfucker, maybe you do need to dunk it because I need to see some aggression. And maybe if dunking it just puts you in the mindset of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna attack, I'm gonna be aggressive, I'm gonna draw a foul, then fine. But like, what are you doing? It's driving me crazy. And my fear is that last year it wasn't a case of, can you imagine how good our record would have been had he played? It's actually, it hid what would have otherwise exposed him. That's my fear.
So I have an anecdotal story that could be applicable to this situation.
Okay.
When I was in high school, my JV team that I was on started the season 1-5. We were terrible. Our assistant coach brought us into practice after starting 1-5 and basically had to beat the shit out of each other practice. That's all we did. We literally got out like football blocking pads and said, okay, drive to the hoop and score. Oh, he fouled you? I don't give a fuck. Score. Like we hit each other, took charges. Like the entire practice was nothing but hitting each other because we needed to get tough. We went 10-1 the rest of the season. I don't know. Obviously, you can't do something like that at the NBA level. There's too much going on. It's different in high school. But like, I feel like that's got to be something where someone just has to slap DeAndre in the face and get something out to toughen that up, because I have seen the aversion of going to the rim, getting fouled. I mean, how many free throws a game is he shooting? 3 free throws a game, something like that? It's just
probably less.
It's not enough. It's not enough.
You're absolutely correct. And actually, I like that example. And yeah, maybe you can't do the pads, although I would love to see that even in the NBA.
I just saw a college level highlight of people doing that in a practice. I don't remember what it was, but it's something that went kind of viral, and it's a thing you can do, sure.
It's fine being a finesse team, but you have to, like, you can't have that Achilles heel. You have to be able to adapt.
It was my favorite practice of all time, by the way. It was the most fun I've ever had at basketball practice.
And so I listened to a really interesting story. Richard Jefferson, they say this about every announcer, like, oh, he's a star in the making. They say that about what's his face, and I disagree. Big Baby?
Glenn Davis?
No, the other one that played with Glenn Davis a lot. Both OKC players.
Oh, Kendrick Perkins?
Kendrick Perkins, yeah.
Oh, God.
Kendrick Perkins, I think is not very good. Richard Jefferson actually is pretty good. Anyways, he told a story where Dirk Nowitzki was like, I'm going to shoot, and I'm going to shoot threes, and that's it. And Avery Johnson came to town and was like, no, I want you to post up. And Dirk was like, this is stupid. Ended up creating like one of the all-time best post moves with that like one-footed thing. It's a staple of the NBA. A bunch of other players do it, and it took someone pushing him out of his comfort zone. And someone did that to Richard Jefferson as well. And so he was just saying, I know what people say about Ayton, but you got to get in there and force him to do it. And most people are like, Ayton's young and look how much potential. And I'm like, he's not showing progress, so I am actually concerned.
And the mindset's the issue because you don't develop that as you get older. Maturity and some other things and experience, sure, but aggressiveness is generally not something you pick up just because the calendar changes.
It's not, I don't think you develop it on your own. You have to be pushed into it.
So I guess the problem is Monty the right coach for that? And I don't really put a lot of this on his shoulders, and I don't think the rest of the team. This is the problem with Dave's example, which is a good one, but it's not like the whole team needs their ass kicked to have a fire lit under them, because Devin Booker and Chris Paul are two of the most competitive players in the NBA, and you can see their frustration with Ayton developing on the court as we speak, which is also not particularly a good sign. So it's not like the team needs to have a whole practice where they get their ass kicked. So the question is, I don't know where else it's coming from. Mark Bryant was one of those guys that I feel like was hyper competitive, and he's one of the assistant coaches who's worked with Ayton. So if that's not the source of it, then what is?
And I think it was you, Chris, that we were like, I don't know why people keep pushing him to shoot threes. And I'm totally on board. That's not the part that I want from Ayton. Like, if he does one a game, whatever. It's like, I want you to get a few good touches every game, at least to start, where you go in and you force the issue. And if it ends up not converting, like, that's okay. You're at least building towards it. Just doing these fadeaways, jump shot bullshit isn't developing you as a player, and it's not getting you the right mindset.
I'm frustrated too because I think the three is becoming a little bit too widespread. I'm not going to go on the old man take of like, I don't want to watch 63s a game. However, I do think that too frequently now it's like everybody on the floor has to be able to shoot the three. And if you're good enough that you can hang in every other area, I don't feel like that has to be a requirement. And one of the other examples I would think of is Giannis, where it was, for a couple of seasons it's been, well, if you could just shoot 35% from three, it's like even if he did shoot 35% from three, defenses would still sag off of him because he's so much more threatening when he drives and he makes his 16-foot Euro steps because he's so lanky. That's the concern. He would have to shoot like 40 plus from three before defenses would finally go, okay, we got to run at him and then figure out what happens if he goes around us. The same is true of Ayton. If he was dominating inside, I mean, maybe he shoots a couple threes a game. I'm not saying it's bad for him to have, but it was probably the wrong developmental task to put on him. I don't feel like that was the right approach.
And you're right about the threes. I would say if in every level of basketball that I've ever played, except the NBA, I guess, this has been the case. You shoot when you're feeling it. And if the team goes and you're just feeling threes the whole game, awesome. Blow out the other team. When they're not falling, you got to take it to the rim. That's basketball 101, and we just can't seem to figure that out. Or we don't have the personnel. But I think we do because we have Booker and a few other guys who can do that.
Well, we have two of the best mid-range shooters and get to the hoop, draw contact if you need to in the backcourt. I mean, Booker can draw fouls and make his free throws. Chris Paul knows how to draw fouls.
Can Booker make his free throws?
Well, he has historically.
Yeah. He certainly has. It's very strange what's happened to him this season because he was number one in the league last year.
Well, now I have questions, too, about like Chris Paul. You know, I'm a little concerned about that, too, because I have to hope he's just still getting into shape, figuring out the chemistry, all of that. But he hasn't played super well. And the other concern that I had is Ricky Rubio was part of ninth fastest pace last year. We're dead last right now. And I wonder if that's some of the regression that we're seeing is Ayton can't get out on a fast break, which is where he and Booker got a lot of points last year. Now everything is a half court set. We don't score in the open floor anymore.
And that's a core tenet of Chris Paul's career.
Yeah. And so I'm not necessarily saying that that's bad, although I will say it might be bad. But I think for a player like Ayton, I think when he's forced into half-court sets exclusively, we can start to see more of who he is at his core.
I saw a stat that said the Thunder started 5-10 last year. That was with the aid of a preseason.
Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, who knows what to make of that? But it is something I think, especially not having a good preseason, a full preseason, a very truncated one that we had this year, and truncated off-season overall. I think that could show that Chris Paul's value is going to come in later on.
And I'm not. Let me be clear. I have question marks. I'm nowhere near as worried about Chris Paul as I am about Ayton.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, 7-4 is small sample size, but it's like if we lost. If this was earlier in the season, we lost the Clippers game and then we lost a bad Detroit game. That was bad. That was a bad loss, but it would have been okay. Then we turn around, beat at the time the team with the best record in the NBA. Mm-hmm. And then lose to the team with the worst record. To me, that's what's most concerning is we play down to the level of our competition, which is not the sign of a great team. It's the sign of a good team.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to be better than good. I want to be like some people are saying top 5,
We were number 2 in NBA.com's power rankings from yesterday, I think.
that aged bad.
Right before, yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, I mean, we're 7-4. That's about what I would have expected at this point. Again, like you said, not necessarily the route I would have taken to get there or expected to take, but we're now, if anything, just more invested in that way. We're trying to make sure that the Suns are the best team they can be. Now, we have no influence over that. We're just fans. But these are the things we see that are holding them back from being potentially even better. They're tied for second in the West behind the Lakers. At least they were going into tonight's games on Tuesday. I don't know what the hell's happened tonight, but we're right in the mix of things so far, and who knows? Maybe it won't hold up. Maybe it'll get better. But it's really cool that at least we can have those conversations about meaningful basketball instead of it just being nitpicking Ayton amidst a 3-8 record where we're like, oh god, Ayton sucks and we suck and this is the worst.
The nightmare that I have is as I pull up the standings, and again, I should cool. Part of me, I think, is justified in this. Part of me should cool it, though, because it's so early. But we have 4 losses. If we lose again, we're out of the playoffs, and it's so early. Who cares? But like that's how tenuous even teams that I think we played much better than, like Dallas, we lose. They have a better record than we do all of a sudden. Part of me, I don't even understand how that happens. But
that's the West.
Yeah.
West is tough.
I have a hot take.
Okay.
That would have sounded even more of a hot take prior to the season. Mikal Bridges is worthy of an All-Star selection.
That is a pretty hot take because there's no way in hell it happens.
I know, but if he keeps this up, he has been amazing this year. And so I guess, clarify, he's more worthy of an All-Star selection than Devin Booker or Chris Paul this season.
Okay, if things continue as they have, and you get a bigger sample size, then maybe, because of what he brings on defense and he's scoring. But then, I mean, I don't know. Then you see the games where he comes back to earth a little bit, and you're like, oh yeah, and then it's really bad.
On the flip side, though, against the Wizards, he was hampered by foul trouble almost the entire game. Still ended up with 15, and Mikal Bridges could play 40 minutes in a game last season and sometimes not even reach like 5 points. So that was at least a positive sign for me from a game that had very few positive takeaways.
Yeah. All-Star, I thought he's a candidate for most improved, and I even thought that was maybe borderline hot take in this early season. But All-Star, I was joking, but I said he was an All-Star in the bubble. So,
I mean, the way I see it, he has to work. It has to be more consistent, of course. He can't have one game where he has 34 points and the next game has 6, like that type of back and forth thing. But his defense has been noticeable on many ends and to a level of close to all defense. So maybe that's why I should revise it to his all defensive team instead of All-Star.
There were some people that made that pick before the season started, though, that he would be on one of those two teams, just because his performance last year almost vaulted him into that conversation. And, of course, they expected him to be even better this year. Problem with the All-Star pick is they don't care about defense.
No.
And it took Gobert, 6 seasons to finally get named to one, and it was primarily just because he was leading the league in rebounding and scored like 14 a game in addition to his defense.
So, Dave, to maintain your hot take, you're going to have to keep it as All-Star.
Yeah.
I hope you're ready for that.
Well, he can keep the other ones, too, but then they won't be hot. They'll be, lukewarm, tepid, cold.
I have a hot
dead.
take that I don't know if I'm ready to lock in, but maybe I'm going to bounce. It's like you guys are my workshop. I'm going to propose this hot take, but I want to workshop it first. Do we see what it looks like with Cam Johnson in the starting lineup?
In place of Crowder?
It's early is my concern, but after 2 of the worst losses among the worst losses that any team has had this season, I know the Clippers got fucking blown out, but and there have been a few blowouts, but for a team of our supposed stature to lose to the 2 worst teams in the East, that's really pretty bad.
Monty was saying after the game he was considering it because that unit's just not gelling, and I'm not even necessarily sure it's Crowder's fault. I think Crowder's played well overall. He's been a little inconsistent. That's the biggest problem, I think, is that all 3 of Bridges and Cam Johnson and Jay Crowder have played pretty well, and occasionally on the same night, but you're just never quite sure which of them is going to step up. And if Booker and Ayton and Paul were playing up to their standard, it wouldn't matter as much because then you're just happy for those contributions. They're kind of more necessary than we thought they would be, though. So I don't know what the answer to your question is. I think they do need to look at changing the starting lineup and see. I don't think Crowder's going to have a problem coming off the bench, especially because he's still going to play 30 minutes a night and he's a team-first guy. So maybe you give it a look and see if you recreate the bubble magic just with a different point guard. I don't know.
I get it. I mean, part of our strength, though, this year has been our bench, which is crazy, comparatively to years past. So
I just don't think your bench can be better than your starters, though.
It's true. It's true. We've had nights where that has been the case.
Yeah, a couple players can be. I mean, the Clippers famously, with Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell back when they didn't both suck.
Yeah.
Those 2 guys should have been starters if we're, looking at just the traditional construction of a roster. They were certainly starting caliber, and Marcus Morris doesn't need to start. But they had an effective duo off the bench. But that was a duo, and the rest of their bench was definitely not a starter-level quality. So this is kind of weird. I mentioned this to Shaun off air, but I was like, man, I didn't realize how quickly we would miss campaign.
Yeah.
Boy, it was noticeable. I don't know if that's a good sign because he really has been playing well, or if it's a bad sign because it showcases our lack of depth at guard, or I don't know. Maybe it's all those things.
I don't know. Booker has not played super well. Like a bunch of our starters have problems right now, except Bridges, pretty much.
But that's the thing, right? And we've talked about this as we've watched Suns games. They've had one complete start to finish game against the Pelicans.
Yeah.
And they're 7-4. And it doesn't feel like walking out those other 6 wins that were anywhere they played especially well. Not that they played bad, but it wasn't like you went, man, like we were clicking on all cylinders. There's no way they could have beaten us tonight. It was like, oh yeah, we played okay, and that stretch was good, but that was about it. There's a lot more. So either these things are going to click, and Chris Paul will get comfortable, and Booker will kind of get his feet back under him, and Ayton will at least get back to what he was, and I think those are all reasonable.
I'm going to retract my changing the starting lineup for now because you're right. Even with everything, we're 7-4. There are some trends that are concerning, but like that's a good record. And it's probably worth writing out a little bit more. I don't want to overreact to a loss, even though it was a really, really bad one. It just seems like Washington has our number. I had a nightmare. I want you both to know, and this is not necessarily prophetic because this is just the Suns. I had a nightmare the very night before Washington where I'm watching the Suns game. They're playing a team they should win, and they're losing, and I am like heartbroken. And I'm like screaming to you and Maisie, like, I can't believe this. But we were at the game, and then they go and they lose. Exactly what I thought was going to happen.
It was very prophetic of you.
Must be a dream if we were actually at a game.
Yeah,
exactly.
I find it ironic, though, that you mentioned the most complete game we've had all season is the Pelicans game, which was probably Devin Booker's worst statistical game in the season.
Yeah. Yep.
Ironic in the way that
it's like we're just not in control.
And Chris Paul.
And Chris Paul, yeah.
It's like, God, I'm trying to think of a good example. There are games where we feel like we're in control, and we can still lose, and that's okay. Then there are games where, like, this Washington game, the Washington game last year, where it's like, what am I even like watching? Like, what is happening?
Yeah, they had turnovers on inbounds passes. You know, we've seen an 8-second violation. We've seen a lot of like mental lapses from a team that is pretty high basketball IQ overall. Between that and the character, it's one of the best things James Jones has done with his roster is really up both of those to a pretty considerably high level, I would say. But I mean, at a certain point, it gets to be the question where it's like, okay, how many games before we start going, maybe there isn't an upside or maybe there isn't going to be more development and this is what we have, which is still decent. So it's not like it's the end of the world, but you can't be like at the All-Star break 40 games in going, well, they haven't really clicked yet and be like, I don't know if that applies anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you're 30-10, then you can, I guess.
Yeah, well,
sure.
they're going to click. They're going to be a title team at that point. So great, yeah.
I mean, Booker's shooting is a little concerning, but more like when he tries to get to the hoop. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, and I'm asking because I'm wondering if I'm reading too much into it, but his moves to the basket seem a step slow. Almost like literally where he takes kind of a long, slow first or second step, and it just is not effective. It doesn't look like he did last year where his moves to the basket are very quick, pretty quick 2 steps going straight to the rim. This is almost like he's buying time to make a pass or a play. It's again, it's a concerning trend for me when I'm watching him.
I remember what you're talking about because especially in the bubble, it looked like he was just faster than everyone.
Yeah.
Consistently just faster than everyone on the court, like everyone else was standing still at times.
He bent them to his will in the bubble.
And it hasn't happened like that now. And I wonder if he's got some sort of hesitation, deferential treatment towards Chris Paul where he's just trying to fit into I don't know. Like you got to figure it's going to click at one point, but
it did happen early last season with Ricky Rubio. That's why I'm not in panic mode yet, because it was kind of the same thing where he definitely was deferring more often. Now he's getting better numbers then, but at the same time, you could see him instead of being like, I'm going to shoot it 30 times tonight, being like, all right, I'm going to play within the offense, especially because they were doing okay in the beginning, right? So it behooved him to play within the system. I think that's the same idea here. It's like, this is Chris Paul. I got to make sure he gets comfortable. Our best version is when he's firing all cylinders to the point where it's been detrimental to himself.
I mean, the truth is, with Ricky Rubio, we were like here. And most people were expecting with Chris Paul, we'd be like here. And the truth is, when you get a new player, it dips first. And then hopefully it's going to end up being higher than we ever were with Rubio. And we just probably have to accept the dip. But that's hard because we see a dip And we're like, if you're a fan of the Spurs or the Lakers, you're like, oh, yeah, they're going to figure it out. If you're a fan of the Suns, you're like, here we go again. It's another losing season. We're going to win 5 games.
I mean, we can only hope that if this is the dip, 7-4 is not a bad dip. So let's hope that, even if we keep it the same pace, we're going to win over 40 games this year.
Yeah, and even if they don't click on all cylinders, like we said, I mean, even if it just get a little bit better, that could be a number 4 seed still, like we talked about, especially because the NBA is so volatile this year between COVID and injuries and everything else that's happening. I mean, there's been so many blowouts. I don't feel like it's recency bias to say that there's been more blowouts through 11 games this year than any season before, because it just feels like every night I look, it's like, oh, that team got washed by 30.
Yep.
Oh, that team got blown out and they're a title contender. Oh, that team's a title contender and they beat this other team by 50. Like, It's been so weird that, the Suns have been relatively COVID and injury-free, and they haven't played their best basketball by any means, whatever their best is, and they're 7-4, so... fingers crossed.
I mean, even like the Raptors, I think the Raptors are going to figure it out-ish, but they keep losing by 1 point. So, like, I should not overreact. But these are things like with DA and Booker and a little bit of Chris Paul. What do we do with the starting lineup? It makes you want to overreact, but you got to try to not. It's bad, the message boards. This is what I do. I listen to Republican radio. I read the message boards. Everyone's losing their minds.
Don't do it. And I get it. I've criticized our fandom before, and I understand where it comes from because it's been so frustrating for so long that I get it. Everything seems magnified. But, yeah, I've stopped reading those comment threads. God forbid the live game threads. Those are a fucking dumpster fire.
Yeah.
The Suns Reddit is happy. You should.
I know. You keep saying that, and I really need to just...
And I follow other subreddits, so I really should, but I haven't.
Yeah.
Okay. When they lose bad, is the Reddit like, it happens, guys. Keep your heads up? Is that the type of comments? Because I like that a lot more than like we gotta see if we can get Rubio back.
Yeah.
No, God, no. There's nothing like that ever. Like I would say the Reddit people are people. Like you're gonna have random outliers, but for the most part, the core contributors are pretty level-headed, and I love it.
Okay, I have a hot take. I have an NBA hot take. It's kind of related to the Suns.
Lightning round.
It's a lightning round. Well, except it's the only one I have left. I was listening to a thing where a podcaster asserted that no team would not trade for James Harden if it was like a reasonable trade. My hot take is I would not want James Harden on this team.
James Harden for campaign. Straight up.
I would not want James Harden on any version of this team.
I would not want to sign James Harden if he wanted to play here for free. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but like I don't like his style.
The only caveat I would say to that is, because I agree with you 100%, is maybe if he was forced into another system, we would see him adapt. I don't think that's possible at this point. I think he's too stuck in his ways, but if he were traded to the Nets, I could see a version where he definitely coexists with Kevin Durant. He's a gifted offensive player, a good enough passer, a good shooter where you could see him fitting. But I wouldn't want any part of that to see if it paid off or not, because, boy, if you're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, and everybody's like, but he's an automatic playoff berth. Not necessarily. Yeah. And also, okay, so you get washed in the first round and all your players aren't happy and he asked for a trade. I don't know. I think he is caustic. I don't like him. I don't like his style of play.
I think in the right situation, he will not be caustic. But right now on this team as it is, it's nothing but. And I think that's by design on a bit his part.
So there's that take for the Suns, but I mean, part of that was also to this podcaster absolutely convinced no team would pass on James Harden. I think that is absolutely not the case.
Trade hasn't been made yet, so...
Yeah.
I think the Lakers would.
Would pass?
Yeah.
So do I.
Why mess with a good thing? And what are you going to trade for him? The only contracts that add up are AD and LeBron. Now, if you're talking about, just conceptually, I mean, sure. Like, would the Lakers want to add a player of James Harden's caliber? Sure, but of course any team would want to add a player of his caliber, so that's not even an argument then. Of course James Harden is better than Langston Galloway. That's no slight against Galloway. He's been a nice little, back to the bench type guy. But, no one's arguing that stuff, and if they are, they're an idiot. But as far as fit and chemistry and style of play, because not to make it all Sun-centric, but that's one of the things I like about Monty's system. It's fun to watch most of the time. It's quick movement, it's sharing the ball, it's passing. I mean, again, when we beat the Pacers, we had like 33 assists on 43 made baskets and 2 turnovers. Like, that sounds like the pinnacle of basketball to me. And James Harden is the antithesis of that.
Okay, maybe it is a lightning round because I do have one more.
Okay.
I think the Warriors have a good shot at top 5.
I don't.
So I mean, it's a hot take. So that's good.
And I think that people that were burying them after the first 2 games were way too quick to react because they played against 2 title contenders without Draymond Green, who I don't even think is that good anymore. But still, I think they're a playoff team. Top half, no. And I think it's just because you can take Steph out of the equation too easily because of his size and his frame. He's really, really good. But just like the 2 for 16 game, because his as good of an outside shooter as he is, I just don't think that holds up over the course of a season or over the course of a playoff.
And don't get me wrong, I don't think they're a great team is constructed. And we've talked about Kelly Oubre's monumental struggles both on offense and defense, really, on that team. But the Warriors scare me, and specifically Steph Curry scares me because everybody was like, "What's his deal?" You know, Luka Doncic, they can ride him to whatever. They can ride James Harden. Well, I think we're seeing after a little bit of a shaky start, Golden State is riding Steph Curry, and I think they could ride him all the way to a top 5. Is my fear. That's my hot take.
Nah, it is pretty caliente though.
Yeah, I mean
We didn't rate them, but
Dave didn't say anything.
I have a very quick hot take that says if games have to keep being postponed, they need to shut down the league for a week or 2.
Thank you for bringing that up, actually, Dave. I meant to say this and I forgot. I would be remiss in not admitting when I was wrong. I gave the NFL a lot of flack for how they handled COVID. And I said, look at the NBA. They're doing so much more. They actually care about their people. NBA is making all the same, what I felt like were mistakes that the NFL has made. So I will say that I was wrong. I don't know what the solution is. I know there's a lot of money on the line. I know that's an issue. But it's not even like we don't even care when players get it now. It's like, oh, okay, well, they can't man a team, so we got to shut it down. And it's like we don't know the long-term effects of this thing. We don't know what we're ultimately exposing our players to, and it's just like it's okay.
There are multiple players who've had it twice.
Yeah.
Now, there are the possibility, just because we don't have enough of a testing sample to know exactly what we're looking at, but there's the possibility that I've read that it can linger in your system to the point where you can still test negative for a span of time and then pop another positive from the same initial exposure. So maybe they haven't caught it a second time because of the travel or whatever else. Either way, it's a concern, no matter what the cause of it is.
And one player got it, and it shows you how we change as a society, our opinions and perspectives. One player got it last year, and it was shut down the league. Now it's like every team seems like, oh yeah, we have some positives here, oh yeah, that game we're gonna have to cancel it. But at what point do we have to start to worry? And I think we're there.
I mean, shutting it down last year was more of an unknown than anything else. It wasn't necessarily, just nobody knew what was going on. It was prudent at the time. I think we've got more of a handle on it, at least treatment methods. But you're right. It is very much brushed off. It's like, oh, he's got it. Well, crap, he's out for 2 weeks. Not, oh, shit, I hope he's okay.
And I know you can't do realistically, you can't do a bubble right now.
Can't do a full bubble, no.
But then, what do? Do you postpone the season until you get a vaccine? How many millions of dollars are going to be lost? What's that going to do to the CBA? I get it. I know it's not an easy answer, but rolling the dice on a bunch of players getting a virus that we don't know a lot about is, I don't like it.
That's the Suns being relatively free of it, too.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
we'll see.
I'm not even a homer, a fan right now.
We'll see now after the Wizards game.
The contact tracing has begun.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to come a point where they're either going to have to play with masks on, even though that's not going to change anything or something. I mean, they just did a bunch of changes today at the emergency meeting they had between the owners and players and whatnot. Maybe that'll help. I don't know, because they're don't dap each other up on the court anymore, and you can't bring strangers into your hotel when you're on the road, and some of those should have already been in place. Some of them feel like they're too small to have an impact, but they're at least trying. They have to try everything they can.
I don't know why they wouldn't do masks. I will be the first to say it sucks to work out in a mask, but I do it because I have to. And so you're in the NBA, you don't want to catch it. I wouldn't eliminate it, but it would sure help.
You can see why this has been so divisive too. I mean, locally, or at least in the state, there has been this problem with the AIA where they're trying to decide whether or not to do high school sports for the winter season. On Friday, their board voted 5-4 against playing the winter sports season. They canceled everything: basketball, wrestling, I forget the other sport. And then today, 4 days after that, they voted 5-4 to overrule their own decision and continue the winter sports schedule starting next week. And there's no income there. There's no money on the line there. It's just kids. And granted, kids are even like more safe from the virus than grown-ass elite athletes are. But it's still a question mark of like, why are we doing any of this stuff? Why aren't we keeping this to the bare minimum so that we can avoid businesses being shut down? The stuff that's really going to like hurt the economy and people's well-being. Why aren't we shutting down everything else that's more optional? And that's a whole other debate for another episode.
Yeah.
Because I'm not about a full shutdown. That's the popular response. Is like Joe Biden / whoever is just going to shut everything down, close up shop, and it's like, well, as much as I hate this counterexample of California, it is still a counterexample of they've had some of the most stringent things in place, and it's still spreading like wildfire there too. Maybe they didn't do it soon enough. Maybe it wasn't targeted properly. Whatever. As usual, the main point of this show is there's no easy answers, and stop pretending like there are.
It's just we're so close to a vaccine, I would think, and I know like NBA is not probably up there on the priority list. They're just players, but it seems like we could get them vaccines soon enough. So maybe just try to play it safe until then. We're not going to until we have to like basically shut down all the games anyway. We had, what was it, 4 games last night? Or 2 games, 4 teams canceled last night or the night before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that keeps spreading, they're going to be forced into a shutdown anyway. So
yeah, and weirdly enough, I mean, it just depends on how it happens. But like the Celtics have been 3 of those canceled games, and I think 2 of the 3 were because of their opponents. Mm-hmm. So now they're like 3 games down the ledger. But baseball figured that out to some extent because like the Cardinals, the Marlins both had huge gaps in their schedule for 2 weeks because they couldn't play. And it's worse in baseball because you quarantine for 10 days, you missed 9 games. So I mean, I don't know. I don't have the answers. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I do because this is a complex situation and there's a way more than sports at stake. But I hope it works out for everybody involved.
I know the one thing that they say is this year during the pandemic at least, so maybe a couple of years, it's not about being fair. Unfortunately, it's just trying to get the product out, get to the end of the season, and as fair as possible is great. But that's not the guiding principle right now.
Alrighty, that is the end of this episode. We didn't rate all the hot takes. I think some were good. I think some were mediocre. I'll let you guys decide which ones you think are which. I offered none of them, so I just throw stones from my glass house.
Didn't even try to even put himself out there.
Not even the ones. That would have been another 30-minute episode if I had, so I just go with the flow.
Yeah.
That's the end of this episode. In between shows, you can find us on our website, objectionnetwork.com, or at youtube.com/objectionnetwork for new videos 7 days a week. We'll see you next time.